Prime Minister risks undermining public faith in politics by going ahead with European elections, which she says she would like to cancel. So is electing representatives for an institution the UK decided to leave 3 years ago a disaster for democracy or an opportunity? Well, joining me to discuss that are the Director of the Hanson Society, Dr. Ruth Fox, the broadcaster and economist Paul Mason, and the political journalist and commentator Isabel Oakeshott. Nice to see you all. People tend to say, well, any election is healthy, it's good for democracy. Is this European election in just over 3 weeks' time good for democracy, do you think?
Well, we could see, ironically, quite high turnout because participation in European elections has never gotten above 40%. So if we see anything above that, then you can make an argument it's been good for participation. But it's very much going to be a protest vote, I suspect. I think that the bigger question is about the integrity of the democratic process. Holding an election that the government of the day says they don't want to hold, they might cancel right up to the day before if they could, and holding an election where we're going out to vote for people who we don't know whether they're actually going to take their seats, and if they do, how long they're going to be there for. Certainly not longer than October 31st unless something in the Brexit process changes. So it is a fairly absurd position for a modern democracy to be in.
Absurd, do you think?
Well, it is absurd. I mean, the fact that these elections are taking place at all represents the abject failure of democracy, but at the same time, it is a huge opportunity for voters to express their anger and frustration at that failure. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there will be a historically high turnout at these elections because people are furious.
And question, Paul, is could they have been prevented?
Well, they could have been prevented by doing a Brexit deal. You know, paradoxically, I remember being on the doorstep in 2017 promising doubtful Labour voters, we will do Brexit. If you'd had a Jeremy Corbyn government, you certainly wouldn't have had this election. But it's there, and we on the left have to fight it. I think we've got no choice but to fight it on our values. The values are pretty clear. We want an open, democratic, tolerant society, and there are forces now mobilising. You know, I think what UKIP's now on 10-14%, and you know this is incipient fascism, and we want to mobilise our people.
UKIP's on a lot less than that actually at the moment.
Good, if that's true.
Brexit is the one that's
the Brexit Party are doing well, and I understand why, because many people see the failure of the Commons to deliver as what you call it a failure of democracy. I see it actually as a slight victory for democracy, because we are a parliamentary democracy, and the parliamentary democracy prevented Theresa May from signing a deal that would have been catastrophic for Britain.
I think if the Labour Party does fight these elections on the basis of your values, you will do very badly, because from the point of view of
the 24th of May.
Well, we'll see. But I mean, could they have been stopped? Bearing in mind that we hadn't yet left the European Union. I mean, I had to say, I felt that we had seen countries joining the European Union be given a pass on holding European elections. Wouldn't that have made more sense?
It might have done, but I mean, the legal position is, if you are a member state, you know, taxation without representation is not a good position to be in for any democracy. And both the UK government and the European Commission were concerned about the prospect of legal challenges for the failure to meet our treaty rights as a member state if we didn't hold them. So we are where we are. The only thing ultimately, as Paul said, that would have stopped this would have been a Brexit deal that should have been negotiated. And the problem with it is, frankly, an epic failure of statecraft on behalf of the British government. You know, a rejection of a treaty for the first time since 1865 by the British Parliament, which might be parliamentary democracy working well, but it's a fairly epic failure. And then, you know, rejection by the biggest margin in modern democratic history. It is a complete mess.
But it could be argued that it's a messy process, but at the same time, actually, European elections might be quite helpful, because, as you're saying, it might shake out different positions.
Well, I mean, certainly the Brexit Party will be hoping that the results of these elections help concentrate minds. Whether that can actually translate into anything that breaks the parliamentary deadlock, I feel rather doubtful. I mean, I'm hearing politicians on all sides talking about the possibility of cancelling these elections. I think there's no chance that's going to happen whatsoever. These cross-party talks aren't going anywhere. I think that they're clearly a cosmetic exercise on both sides.
There is a second deadline, which is them not taking their seats, which comes up at the end of June if we do elect MPs. And clearly what Mrs May is hoping is that, you know, as you say, minds will be concentrated to the point that the thought of possibly a large crop of Brexit MPs taking their seats will mean that Conservatives, maybe even the DUP, will fall into line.
I think that's very, very wishful thinking. Something a lot bigger is going to have to change for that to happen.
Well, I agree. I don't see a deal coming out of these talks. I would like for my representatives, my colleagues and comrades in the Labour Party, to get out of the talks. There's no point to them. There was a point to getting Theresa May to the day where she could ask for an extension. That was a reasonable thing to do. From what I'm hearing, they are going nowhere.
But, I mean, isn't the effect of this process, for example, on the Labour side, which obviously you're linked to, that Labour's position is being shaken out a bit? I mean, it's being defined a bit more that Mr Corbyn is probably having to give some ground on the principle of a second referendum. We've got someone like Andrew Adonis standing as a candidate who's
all the candidates are very Remain.
20 candidates.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a good thing. I mean, is that not party democracy and
yes, I mean, look, I think that Labour's strategy has to be, we could have a snap-general election in June or in October. Our strategy has to be to form a coalition of people who care more about social justice than they do about leave, who voted leave, with the majority of our members and voters who voted to remain. That's our strategy. And we can't break from that. We can't allow the elections to become a proxy referendum, Remain versus Leave. What we can do is mobilise everybody who sees the danger of Little England nationalism, xenophobia, racism and misogyny, because those forces, just as in Spain, are on the rise here. And I think we can mobilise...
And should that include a second referendum?
Well, look, for me, it's not a decisive issue. In this election...
So it could.
Look, there's no... I think Labour's motion, the NEC motion tomorrow, is likely to include the promise of a confirmatory referendum if a deal is done in Parliament that it should be done to a referendum. But to me, that's not the main issue. The main issue is what kind of Britain and what kind of relationship with Europe do you want? And Labour's position there is really clear: an open Britain and a strong relationship to Europe.
Part of the problem with these elections, and you alluded to it earlier, is that we have never taken these elections really seriously in this country. We still don't know, after 46 years of membership, what the point of an MEP is. Would that be fair?
Well, yes. I mean, compared to most other members of the EU, our participation in EU elections has been very, very low.
Although theirs is
dropping. Theirs is nearer now in terms of the average to us than it used to be. But we've never taken it seriously, and that's been a reflection of our whole attitude to Europe since we joined, and part of problem of where we are now. I mean, our audit of political engagement, though, shows that actually knowledge and interest in politics, despite the levels of dissatisfaction, despite the sort of public attitudes to the state of the political parties being pretty dire, actually knowledge and interest in politics, certainty to vote, in our study, which we've done for the last 15 years, our audit of political engagement, is actually at fairly high levels.
But we did have in surveys emerging somewhere a majority wanting a strong leader who would break the rules.
Yes. And that has also been true for the last few years. It's not just a Brexit issue, and actually a fair number of Remainers want a strong leader willing to break the rules. The willing to break the rules bit is the worrying bit. It doesn't surprise me that people want a strong leader. You'd ask that at any point in the post-war period, most people would have said yes. But the willing to break the rules, I think, is a product of the sense of political frustration.
And in a sense, the fact of these elections undermines one of the central claims of the Brexiteer case, that Europe's not democratic, doesn't it? Because these are elections for members of Parliament, which will then feed into the selection of officials at the top of the European Union.
Well, they are democratic, and I think, picking up on what you were saying, you're right. I mean, probably a tiny fraction of 1% of voters in this country know who their MEP is, their regional MEP. I think these elections could change all that. And actually, there you go about this point of a strong leader. One of the most remarkable bits of polling I've read recently is that the Tories, if they had the option of Nigel Farage as a Tory party leader, he would come second only to Boris Johnson in their list of choices. So that tells you something about the yearning for somebody who will actually stand up and do stuff. And the polling is extraordinary at the moment. You look at Lord Ashcroft's polling on the space for a new political party, and it isn't a right-left thing. About half of voters just feel that the current parties don't represent their views.
But politicians like elections, and the truth is this could be an election in which Labour comes first.
I'm certain that Jeremy Corbyn wants to win. And I think that looking at all the polls I've seen over the last 4 or 5, it's possible that Labour could come first, narrowly. I think Brexit will throw a strong second. It's really interesting to be around a political table and not be talking about the Tory party. I mean, I do want to talk about them. I see the Conservative Party as a crucial bulwark of preventing conservatism in this country sliding towards racism and nationalism. I want the Conservative Party to be a strong part of our democracy, and I'm afraid, having been through all the crises that Labour's been through in the last 3 years, the crisis that the Tory party's going through is much more existential.
Can I just challenge you on the racism thing? Where are you picking that up in terms of a rise of racism and that finding an outlet in conservatism?
Well, if you get UKIP on double digits...
UKIP is nowhere near that. UKIP is nowhere near... UKIP is basically dead. What we have now is the Brexit Party, which is very different.
Tommy Robinson parading up and down Whitehall...
He's got virtually no support. He's an isolated figure.
I'm sorry, he is the most recognised figure on British
fringe
Facebook.
He is an advisor to UKIP. Anyway, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. This is All Out Politics. Coming up next, a far-right